"We hold these truths to be self-evident." So the signers of the Declaration of Independence claimed. Yet, what they held to be true was not self-evident to most of the world. Everywhere one looked in 1776, peoples were ruled by monarchs and oligarchs. Before America, there had never been a country founded on popular sovereignty. Given that unprecedented experiment, the stakes were exceptionally high. Part of America's unique hope was that great leaders might rise from humble beginnings, and great statesmanship take modest form. Such is the case of Abraham Lincoln, the president who led America through her greatest crisis, the Civil War. And such is America's most beloved speech, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. The Battle of Gettysburg was fought in the first 3 days of July 1863. It was a major turning point of the war as it ended Robert E. Lee's invasion of the North. Lee returned to Virginia, never to move north across the Potomac again. 4.5 months later, on November 19th, part of the Gettysburg battlefield was dedicated as the Soldiers' National Cemetery. 15,000 politicians, soldiers, journalists, and citizens were in attendance that day. The main speaker was a famous orator, Edward Everett. He spoke for about 2 hours, 13,000 words in total. Lincoln's remarks were scheduled at the end of the entire ceremony. His purpose, to dedicate the land as a memorial cemetery. The president spoke for less than 2 minutes. He used a Spartan 272 words. Lincoln wrote the speech mainly in Washington and likely revised it the night before the ceremony while staying at the home of Gettysburg attorney David Wills. He began by remembering the founding, not the signing and ratification of the Constitution, but the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The opening words, 70 years ago, calls to memory 1776, not 1787 or 1788. Then the president identified what the founding fathers achieved. They brought forth a new nation. Not a federation or union of states, but one nation. The nation was conceived in liberty and dedicated to a singular ideal that all men are created equal. The ideal was framed in 2 defining ways. Equality is not the handiwork of men or governments. It is the work of the Creator, the God in whose image all humans are created. Secondly, the ideal, though framed by the founders as a self-evident truth, was in Lincoln's words, a proposition. An ideal, in other words, that had to be proven. Why so? The answer lay in the next part of the speech. There Lincoln shifted to the terrible crisis in which the country found itself, the Civil War. He called it a test, whether a nation conceived in liberty and devoted to universal equality can long endure. At the same time, the crisis was more than war alone. If the Civil War had broken out as secession and as an attempt to restore the Union, it had become a war about what contradicted the proposition on which America was founded. 8 months earlier, on January 1, 1863, Lincoln had issued the second and final version of his wartime command, the Emancipation Proclamation. By doing so, he reinvigorated the war effort around the great task of ending slavery. Only the restoration of the Republic as one nation, which meant not only defeating the Confederacy, but ending slavery, could prove America's great proposition. Lincoln then turned to the dedication of the battlefield as a memorial cemetery. It turns out there was little to be done. Lincoln declared that we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. Here the president shifted to the final part of his speech. He pointed to the purpose for which the men died and to which the living must now dedicate themselves going forward. The fallen, he said, gave the last full measure of devotion to the cause of freedom. So that they would not have died in vain, it fell to the living to complete the great task of proving the proposition on which the nation was conceived, to defeat the Confederacy and to free the slave once and for all. It is for the living, Lincoln charged, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. On April 9, 1865, Lee's surrender at Appomattox sealed the victory. Just 8 months later, on December 6, 1865, the ratification of the 13th Amendment sealed the abolition of slavery in America.